It's about to go down with Marc and Cathey, a live coaching show about dropping ideas. Marc and Cathey coach and have conversations with brilliant idea creators who are reimagining the world through the expression of their words, thoughts, and action.
Hey, everybody. I am Cathey Armias.
And I am Mark Williams. Welcome to It's About to Go Down, a breeding ground for idea conversations. And I use that term intentionally because we are honored to be joined today by Mr. Dan Strum. And Dan, you know it's a good idea when people start taking your idea and telling other people about it. And that's what I have done with your idea around the Fight Club. And for anybody who's watching, if you've got images of Brad Pitt in your mind, please take Brad Pitt out of your mind, put Dan Strum in your head, because he's about to blow your mind with an idea that he has about a breeding ground for ideas and learning and community. And I'm gonna shut up because only the man himself can really explain his idea, why he's the one to share it, and what we can do with this idea. So Dan, welcome to It's About to Go Down. Tell us about the Fight Club and all of the marvelous ideas that are going on in your head.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Cathey, for having me. You know, I've been watching It's About to Go Down. I've been watching your episodes, and I love what you're doing in cultivating conversations about communications and developing ideas. I think it's super valuable and super important. And I'm thrilled that you've invited me to be part of this conversation. The idea of Fight Club didn't come from the movie for me. I was working in a cybersecurity company, and a bunch of people came together for this meeting, all these people from different sub-disciplines of cybersecurity. And one person said, here's an IP address that was associated with fraud. Another guy said, I see this IP address associated with this social media account. Another said, I see this social media account associated with other crime and these other IP addresses. And together, these people came together, and at the end of the day, they not only had an IP address of fraud, but they had 5 other IP addresses, 10 other crimes, 3 social media accounts, a real name, a real address. They built a dossier based on this one tiny piece of information this guy came to the table about. It was an exciting meeting where everybody came together and just nobody really worked very hard. They just came together and that came out of the hopper. When I was working on public speaking, I had a germ of an idea that I wanted to talk about, but I was hung out, like, maybe this idea isn't so good, or maybe this story won't go over, or maybe my explanation isn't clear. I had so many doubts that I put off giving the speech meeting after meeting after Toastmasters meeting after Toastmasters meeting. And I realized that what I need is a Fight Club. I don't need people to write my speech for me, but I need them to respond. I need them to react. I need them to be in the room so that when I say, is this a good idea? People will say, yes, or no, or maybe try this. And all the feedback together would get me going. In my Toastmasters Club, I created a series of Fight Clubs to help people develop their public speaking. And they've been remarkable. They've taken people who are stagnant, isolated in their speech development, and putting them together with the community at a time when it can really stimulate them and get them running forward and across the finish line.
Dan, you know what I love about this is, like, this is a Toastmasters, you know, you go to Toastmasters, you give a speech, somebody gives you feedback on the speech. This is like pre-speech feedback. This is like, I love that because we don't people at Toastmasters don't usually, that's not a normal thing, which is why it's so cool. And I could see why it kind of caught fire. It is like, you're almost kind of doing what a marketing agency might do, which a marketing agency will sometimes do what they would call like A/B testing. And they're like, oh, hey, what if we run a campaign like this? We think this will be a good campaign, or we think this also might be a good campaign, two totally different messages. Which one are people going to respond to before we spend millions of dollars running this campaign? And so that is super unique. I love that. I just have a quick question for you though. So going back to the cybersecurity, because that's very fascinating to understand that a bunch of people are in this room and you start piecing together things that not everybody could see. Did somebody name it Fight Club then? Is that where the name came from?
Yeah, that's where the name came from. And, I'm leery about talking about cybersecurity because in many ways that's so much more interesting than public speaking. But that's where I heard the name from. And
Yeah.
I like the rambunctious energy that brings. I think the name is problematic. I think it doesn't resonate like as a sales tool. But for people who've participated in the meetings, it definitely has energy. So I'm not sure what to do with it. But Cathey, to your point, back during the height of COVID, when we were meeting only online, I had formulated a Fight Club to work through some material. I started working through it, and a fellow club member, Joe, interrupted me and said, "Hey, Dan, why don't you stand up when you deliver this?" Joe is he's a director. He works in the performing arts. He has this visual and expressive vocabulary that's built into how he is. I was just going to kind of like look at my notes on screen, and sure, I tried to deliver it with some energy, but he's like, "No, stand up and move." It transformed everything, my tone, my energy, my content. And this was not after the one and done delivery was done. This wasn't at my Toastmasters meeting where I get the feedback saying, "Yeah, maybe next time stand." This is like, dude, stop right there, stand up, and then keep going. So,
This is like live feed, like kind of live in the moment feedback more. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So Marc, I'm just curious, I know one of the conversations that we had when we talked about Fight Club and we were talking to Dan about being on the show, as soon as you told me Fight Club, I mean, of course, I thought of Brad Pitt. I'm thinking of dogs and I'm thinking of all these things that could be related to the Fight Club. But in this case of like, it's kind of like on the fly creative feedback that doesn't wait. It's not even so. Dan, you just cleared something up for me too. It was like you could also be delivering something right smack in the middle of it. Somebody will be, stop. You should stand up. Right. So it's kind of like, it's almost like you're rehearsing for a theater production that's about to open and you're just doing whatever it takes you're kind of doing all the little components that it takes to be kind of stage ready. Does that sound about right, Dan?
There are two flavors of Fight Club. One is where you stand up and give a 5 to 7 minute speech, or I think we did 4 to 6 minutes, which is pretty much non-interrupted, but getting a slew of feedback back afterwards.
Okay.
The other flavor is where it's like, "Hey guys, I have this idea that I'm working on. Let me talk it through." The example I gave was from the other flavor.
Right. Right.
This came from my own inability as a public speaker to sit down at home and to create content. I needed the stimulation of other people giving me feedback so I could take things further. And as I did so, I realized that I could formalize the process because it's not just me who needs feedback. When you think about it, the art of writing is different from the art of public speaking. The art of saying, hello, Marc and Cathey, is different than me saying, hello, Marc and Cathey on paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different communication. And I personally felt the need to engage with the people directly. And I recognize that it might be something that I could formalize that other people can do as well.
All right, let me say this. First of all, I had the privilege of experiencing Fight Club in the fight, right? In the fight.
In the
I
flesh of the
heard
fight.
Dan, yeah, I heard Dan talk so much about it, and then I had the opportunity to walk into a room, Dan, I think it was with 4 other people, I'll say 5, counting you. 4 other people I did not know. And we sat around this table in this small room, and Dan introduced the whole history behind it. And then he gave us the basics. And there were 3 basics that I think are really, really important when putting something together, right? And those basics were only talk about what you know,
Okay.
follow the structure of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And Cathey, you'll love this one. Remember, stories are such an essential part. So think about a story you could tell and how you can start off with it or refer to it at the end. Those 3 basics have been so instrumental. I got to tell you, Dan, that I've used them in some of my coaching sessions. Of course, always giving you the nod. And then from there, Dan gave us these 3 prompts, all about advice on this particular occasion. And they were 3 different prompts, all on the same subject, and we could choose our own. And then we had about 5 minutes to ruminate, to think about our response, and just pen and paper, pencil and pad, and just jot it down, and then get up and actually present it. I want to tell you, Dan, that this past summer, when I competed for the World Championship of Public Speaking, I was in front of a group and I had this idea. Thanks, Cathey. Cathey always sparks great ideas for me. And it was this whole idea about love. And I had not put the speech together, but I went in front of this group of Toastmasters and I didn't deliver the speech. I talked them through the idea. Ultimately, Fight Club, right?
Yeah.
And when it was done, what they ultimately said, and I really want you to think about this, is we should do this more often. We should have people come to our club and talk through the idea. See, public speaking is often this solo sport. You prepare on your own, you practice on your own, you deliver on your own. But this idea of making it a community effort in a lab, Cathey said A/B testing, and I was thinking, it's like in the lab, it's like in the studio. Everybody's around and they're just feeding into it way before the time to deliver. I think this is a very transformational idea because it takes you out of the solitude.
I remember, Marc, the night that you were going to go deliver, because you and I had a phone conversation. I remember how critical this was, Dan. Marc said Marc and I were tossing up this idea of what his final speech might be. And we're like, oh, it should be about love. And I remember, Marc, I remember specifically, you said, well, I'm going to give the other old one. I'm going to give it now because I don't have this one formulated. And I think I said, why don't you just spend your time asking them what they think of the idea? Basically doing what we do in our show. But I remember that when you left there, people were blowing you up with like, oh, like if they thought it was a good idea or they thought it was a bad idea or what you could say to it, or so Dan, it's such a good idea. Just because I'm a marketer, I have an idea. So the name thing's bothering me a little bit, but I'm going to throw something out there. I have a story behind it, and I'll tell you the little story, but I think it would be fun if we all kind of through this conversation just kept brainstorming what it could be, but I'll throw one out that might get our creative juices going. A long time ago, I was part of this group of a bunch of marketers, and we were going to have a conference, and we were going to have 6 people from different parts of marketing deliver basically a big, keynote, all in one room, everybody in one room. And we were touting that each person would teach you 3 lessons. And so we named the little mini creative conference 18 lessons. Like you were going to walk away and you were going to have 18 lessons. We're guaranteeing you, we're telling you that each person is going to build their presentation so that you can walk away with 3 lessons in each and it was cool because everybody had a different discipline, right? Everybody was doing a different thing. What if, and then my mind started, I don't know, I remembered that. I mean, and that was like, we only ran it once. It was super successful, but it was like 10 years ago. What if it was like, so I started writing down, 7's my favorite number. So I wrote 7 minds. And then I was like, but 10's the perfect number. I wrote 10 minds. And then you said there were 4 people in the room, Mark, and I said 4 minds. It doesn't really matter and then I was like, what if it's like the 4 minds club, And then there's this really good story on it or the 4 minds lab, because I like that word that you said, Mark. What if it's indicative and it makes people think, hey, we always hear this 2 minds, and you maybe even name it 2 because people many times say 2 minds are better than 1. And so maybe you call it the 2 minds club, which basically means the 2 minds could be 1 is the person that's going to do it. And the whole other mind is however many people are in the room. It's the kind of the group consciousness. And so maybe that fills out why there's 2 minds. I just talked myself into that one, by the way. Okay. So as I was talking, I was like, no, 2 minds is good. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? What do you guys think?
I like the word lab. There's something about Fight Club, about the I went back to watch videos like on YouTube to see what the movie was about, and a bunch of people who are just like positively engaged. I mean, like, it's not like there's no suffering in the movie. It's like positive piled on. I thought of things like boot camp, but boot camp is suffering, and boot camp, nobody wants to be in boot camp. I thought of, in rugby, there's something called a scrum, where like when the ball's about to start, and they all kind of like all the people kind of lock arms and move together as one organism, which is kind of exciting and fun, but it's not a beautiful word.
Yeah. It sounds like a couple other words. Yeah.
But I like, well, it kind of sounds like my last name, but that's still an ugly adaptation of it. But what I like about your idea is like maybe it doesn't have to have the word speech in it. Maybe I could move away from that. I do want to I see my future as being able to work with young professionals or mid-level professionals, companies that want to cultivate their next generation of leaders. So I'm trying to figure out maybe a name, maybe a message that will get me to work with these people. I feel like well you work with people, regardless of what is in somebody's head, what abilities they have. Communicating those abilities are essential for them to achieve more than they can as individuals. If they want to influence people, they want to work in teams, they want to inspire other people, they need to communicate. And I see this as a workshop that can help companies develop that next level of leadership.
Yeah, that's one of the things I can see the huge benefit from, Dan. I'm going to put on my marketing hat for 1 second, Mark, and then I want to hear what you're thinking. But okay. I do want to preface something, because you just said something that I think a lot of people, when they're first trying to come up with a name, and if you've ever been part of a naming convention for any product or service or anything like that, it's hard and your brain goes to so many places. Even when Mark and I were we have a funny story about how we're trying to like come up with a name for this web show, and we're like thinking about all the technical, like, should it have speaking, should it have storytelling in it? And then we went back to a saying that we always said to each other, and we were like, this fits the story. I will tell you, A name is just a name until you put a story behind it. Nike doesn't mean anything until you put a story behind it, until you build that as a brand. And some names are so boring. Some people try to do the technical thing and like make it sound very technical. Now people understand exactly what it is. And then they don't have a really good brand behind it. And then that's like, well, you named it technically, and then you were lazy on telling the story behind it. So we should keep your mind open for everything. The reason I think Fight Club evokes a lot of emotion, when you hear the word fight, there's obviously words that we hear as humans. When we hear the word, we immediately have a picture in our head of what that could be. And so we picture something that's very highly emotive. And then our brain is also confused, like, what the hell? What's Fight Club for speaking or for leadership? Anyway, Mark, I just wanted to say all that like really the story behind it all becomes the bigger. I think that's the most important piece. You come up with a name, but you have the really good story behind it.
I love that point, and what it makes me think of is the story that Dan told earlier. Almost becomes a story behind it, and yet it's the story that leads to a word Fight Club that doesn't quite fit this. And it makes me wonder, Dan, when you first introduced this concept at a Toastmasters club of all places, first of all, I'm just curious about what was the story behind that introduction? And what were some of the responses that you got? Because I think that might open up some more options because it's another part of the story.
Right. So there's always been some friction, and I have some other names I've been toying with, but they're still not right. I think the name Fight Club is going to go the way of all things at some point, sooner rather than later. But I'm still like fishing for the right one. When I introduced the concept, people thought the name was interesting. A couple people were turned off, but I had built a reputation in the club. I was a very good evaluator. I tried to be insightful, attentive. People were confident that I would make it worthwhile. And we came into the meeting, I conducted the meeting, I parsed the time between participants, made sure everybody got their time to speak, to get the proper feedback from everyone. Like, the name wasn't the driving force. Like the whole meeting as a whole had the proper energy and the proper engagement. People were fully engaged in reaching the results that they were there to reach.
Yeah.
So I don't think that to your point, I don't think the name has ever been a selling point. It just hasn't been something that I found better. I like being a little bit irreverent. I like being a little bit snarky, and I haven't found something that brings that to the table yet.
Yeah. The craft lab, I was thinking, the something lab. Mark, I'm curious if you have any ideas in that space. I like the lab thing. I think it's really cool because that descriptor makes it really easy to understand that you're bringing it to a lab.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a good word.
Cathey, you are the marketing genius. How dare you challenge me to come up with some names?
I'm like putting you on the spot. What do you think, Mark?
I'm laughing at myself, but this is as they call it, a safe space. So
yeah, it's
I'm just
such
gonna,
a safe space.
I'm gonna throw out these names, right?
Yeah.
Stream of consciousness. The first thing I
Yes.
wrote down was spark plug. I don't know where I got spark plug from. Don't go with that. Don't go with that. I don't think so. Then
like
you said something about 4 minds, so I wrote down 3 basics because I was thinking about the basics.
Yeah.
Then I wrote down 4 Minds Lab, but there's something about 3 syllables that's kind of throwing me off a little bit. I wrote down group speak, but I like the idea of taking the word speak out of there, but group speak stood out to me. Dan, I know you don't like Strum Lab, but I did write down Strum Lab.
Yeah.
Or just Strum.
I know, I like that too.
Right?
Yeah.
I wrote down Storm Lab because I think I was thinking of brainstorm.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of brainstorming going on in the lab. I wrote down Brain Lab. I wrote down the lab. And the last thing I wrote down was insight, because I heard you say that word. And that really resonated with me. And I think there could possibly be some play on the word insight. I just don't know what the play would be.
That's a stimulating vocabulary list or name
It
list.
is. How dare you not call yourself a creative, Mark? Are you crazy? That was awesome. I asked you for one and you're like, hold on. I got a bunch.
I keep hanging around you, that's why.
Dan, I love this. You know, the one that really struck me out of all of those? I love the Storm Lab. And it does have that edginess to it, Dan, like the Storm Lab. But instead of saying brainstorm, because that becomes kind of a cliche, overused, but then storm has also this thing of like, in a storm, everything's kind of just moving. And, you know, I think that's why it was originally called a brainstorm. There's a lot of different moving pieces and stuff. Anyway, those are ones I liked. But I do, you know, not that we're making this whole conversation be about that, because I would love to start chatting with you, Dan, about how Mark and I think you could really utilize this and bring it to people. So the name is very important, but it's also something that as you build it, you can figure out what you're going to call it. You know, maybe something really resonates with you at some point. And you're like, that's it. That's the one. So I don't know if I would get too stuck on it. I would just keep your mind open. But I do love having the story of where it all started and just saying, hey, it was really cool. And when I was in cybersecurity, a bunch of people used to get in the room and one little piece of information was never the whole story. And that one little piece of information couldn't do anything without the other pieces. But once we put all the pieces together, whoa. And like, that's the big story. That's the story of like, we all hold all these pieces, but man, when you get all these people together in a room, you get somebody that's good at production, you know, this guy that you were talking about, and like tells you one little thing, stand up, and you're like, everything changes. One little micro twist of something changes it. So there's this reckoning of all these people coming together to create it. So yeah.
You should definitely come to a fight club. I think it might be transformative. Mark, you mentioned that there were 3 elements that you keyed into. I just want to kind of fill you in on the backstory of those. So I was president of my Toastmasters club, and I thought that I should be able to fill any role that came up, because there were always last-minute changes, always some chaos. It's like, anything that comes up, I'll do. Anything that is, except for being the speaker. Because I was afraid that I'd give a speech that would be terrible. You know, I was fully confident that I could stand up and give a 5 to 7 minute speech. But would I really want to subject people to that? One member of our club always chides new speakers, saying, don't end your speech with thank you. Your audience should be thanking you. And I thought, what would it take to give a 5 to 7 minute extemporaneous speech that was thank worthy? That was the seed for the first fight club of this flavor, the extemporaneous speech fight club. That fight club was delightful. It was energetic, but it was chaotic. And it was at that meeting where, in the discussion that followed, we came up with those principles. Speak about something that you know. Tell a story. if you have no other major organizing principle, start some point, conclusion. So just from the experience of having a fight club, something for me as something that I needed in order to be able to deliver a speech, we created a framework where other people could also deliver effective speeches. And then from subsequent fight clubs, we draw other lessons and other tips that can help us. At the fight club that you attended, Mark, somebody cited some research, and we said, okay, citing expertise that gives you credibility, that makes it seem that you're even more prepared than you are. Somebody brought in elements from other speeches that they gave in the past. It's like, that's great. Use elements that you've used in the past. So there are all of these elements that can come together, not just the 3 principles that emerged from the Fight Club #1, but every time you do this, everyone in the room can distill some wisdom, which can inform their future speaking.
Yeah.
Kathy, I got to tell you, I suddenly have this image of this space where there are different rooms, labs, will you?
Yeah.
And when our company is mulling over whether it be a vision statement, a mission statement, a pitch, a presentation, something that we're cooking up that we want to be able to present, but it's too hard for us to kind of like think of something on our own. Going to this space, this lab, this storm lab, or for lack of a better term, where like you're hosting these things and people are in there like just they're mulling it out until they come out with something. I just see that space, and I say that because way beyond Toastmasters, and I said this to you after I left the Fight Club, I think that this has so much value way beyond a Toastmasters club. I think there are so many institutions, groups, companies, startups that are all afraid, to use your language, are all afraid of delivering a terrible speech or a terrible pitch or a terrible presentation. And they need to put their, watch this, their 4 pieces together. I just snuck that one in. I just snuck another one in.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. It's funny, Dan. I was just having a conversation with somebody today that's about to launch a company in kind of the consulting, coaching space. And the thing I was telling her today was like, I was like, you have to have a hook, meaning, yes, you do something that a lot of other people do, but in order for people to buy what you're doing, there has to be a hook. And if you think about Fight Club or Storm Lab or whatever it ends up being, 2 Minds Club, whatever, it's like the Chinese say, it's same, but different. You're doing the same thing. There's creative companies out there that already do this. They come in and they run formal brainstorming. They have a whole system on how they do it. So it's not that it's not being done, but it's like you've taken your own great spin on it. You've added some 3 principles to it, which I love, and you made it your own. And that's why I do think the name is important. I do think that, you have really strong outcomes with these. You're like, hey, we're going to come in and there's like 2 ways you can do it. The one way is you can come in and we can work on all the components, which I think is unique. I think that one's very unique, especially in the speaking world or the, like Toastmasters world, of course. And then there's the other way where it's like, no, you can come in completely and do you can have one that you've already done that maybe you already brought to the first part of the lab or the other part of the lab, and now you're on the other part. But I think, Dan, what you name it, you give it a backstory. You go to companies and you say, I can run this. And this is like, that to me, that becomes that's the attraction factor, bar none. It's not that nobody else is doing it, but If you just say, oh, I can do this really cool thing where I bring people together, that doesn't sound cool. Doesn't sound like anything.
You know, Cathey, I'm glad that you said that, because Dan shared that one of the things that he'd really love to figure out is, how do you present this idea? And that sticks with me because, Dan, you and I talked about Fight Club for a while before I actually got to go to one. But it wasn't until I got there that I really got it, and then I really got the value of it. But you're not always going to have that opportunity for people to experience it to understand its value. And so I'm curious, Cathey, because now you're the one person, the one odd person out who you've heard about
I'm
it.
always the odd person. Well, I've heard of it, but I haven't been to it. I haven't.
You haven't been to it,
yeah.
right? And so I'm so curious about how, taking what you've heard so far, how might you explain what this idea is?
Well, the way I kind of described it before, like just before when I was saying, because in my mind, I'm picturing, you know, we all have the little components to it. And when we come back together, we see it in a bigger picture. But that's a gift you give any one person. If I say, for instance, if I'm going by your kind of basic foundations, Dan, and I say, I'm going to talk about something I know, pickleball, soccer, those are two sports I play, right? Well, let's say it's one of those two, right? It's like something that I know. Speaking, anything like that, you know, TED Talks, whatever it might be, I might be very knowledgeable in that because it's something that I know about, but you all are giving me things that I don't know. For instance, Dan, you might be in the Fight Club and go, I'm super curious how people get TED Talks. I don't even know how that works. Do you apply? Does somebody ask you? Like, how does that come about? Like, well, you know, you might say things that I didn't think about bringing into it because I'm this close to it and I already know it. So even though I might be the expert or I might know that topic very well, the value I think that you bring is everybody has a piece of the big story. Everybody's bringing a valuable piece. That's how I see it, Mark.
There's a big element. For me, there's a big element of audience. As a writer and as an educator, like educator of writing and public speaking, I've always been obsessed with the idea of audience. You can talk to me till you're blue in the face about TED Talks, but unless you're talking to me about a facet of that, which is relevant or of interest to me, we're not connecting. But as soon as you start talking about TED Talks about like you could learn amazing things about cooking or gardening, you know, things that I'm interested in, then like you might connect to me. It doesn't matter, like you might have very esoteric aims for your speech, but you still need to connect to your audience in certain terms and then bring them there.
Yes.
So a big part of this was just to bring the speech production process in connection with an audience at the outset. Forget the idea of sitting at your computer and hashing things out. Like, when's too early to be in front of an audience? Let's do it from the start. There's time when you need to improve your draft. You know, if you take a Fight Club speech and give it in the meeting, you're going to get feedback saying, gee, it sounds like you didn't have much time to prepare. Well, hello. No, I didn't. But that's a different exercise. You know, taking your speech and making it better, there's a forum for that, a different forum for that. But when's the time to to socialize your idea? Pretty early on.
So it's basically having and being able to, again, going back to the kind of marketing and the testing, the A/B testing, you're almost testing with an audience, for an audience, to an audience, right?
Take out the word almost and you got it.
Yeah, not almost, right? Yeah, you are, right? Yeah. But you are doing it in what, Mark, you described before as a safe space, because you don't want to, like, as a keynote speaker, somebody that gets paid a lot of money, you do not want to test with your client's audience. You know, that's not a good testing lab, is a place where you're getting paid. It should have already been tested.
Oh, but I might socialize my idea with Cathey and Brian and Mario like we did this summer.
Yeah.
Right? I wouldn't test it in front of the actual audience. And by the way, I just used that phrase because I had to write that down as soon as you said it, Dan. How can you socialize your idea? Before you said, forget sitting at your computer and hashing things out. How can you socialize your idea?
I love that.
Love that question.
That's a good descriptor of what you're doing. I love that.
Oh.
I love that a lot.
Yeah. Wow. That even trumps beta testing, which is the next thing I wrote down. But because I do think it's so much about socializing idea. And just on a side note, it was nice to be in a room with other minds, and especially people I didn't know, and making connections with people that I probably never would have met anywhere else. So there's an interesting social aspect that is often left out of public speaking. Public speaking can be a very lonely thing. We suffer from the angst and the anxiety of being judged, and whether or not, forget other people thinking our ideas are terrible, our own selves thinking they're terrible. So it's like, what Cathey reminds me of? So I did this one speech where I pulled down my pants and I was wearing shorts, right? And
yes, you did.
Yes. And for me, one of the things that resonated with me about that is there's that old myth or advice, just imagine the audience sitting in their underwear, right?
Yeah.
So I ultimately did the reverse, right?
Yeah.
So public speaking is like this anti-socialized thing. So what if you reverse it and make it a social activity?
I love that, Mark. I love that a lot, because you're right. I mean, a lot of, Dan, you probably, being president of a Toastmasters club, you understand. I even like what you said. You were like, I'll do any role but speaker. I was like, and yet the whole reason that people go to Toastmasters is to speak, but it's that weird thing of like, oh, I got to be ready and I got to really prepare. And I pictured, when you said it, I pictured somebody sitting in front of their computer going, okay, what do I write about? Oh, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know. One really cool thing that I think I'm also taking away from it that really excites me, because I love this line, is like, how do you socialize it? But you said it, Dan, and I just was like, oh, chills. We always talk about, anybody that's a speaker coach or anybody that's a great speaker will understand, is, I always have this saying that I say, stories are from you, but for them. And so if the only way that you can understand you can replace the word stories with anything. Speaking is from you, but for them. Presentations are from you, but for them. Whatever it is you're doing is for the audience. And yet, because we get so isolated, we get so fixated on the things that we had to think about, we forget about the audience. It's so easy to forget about the audience when you're like, oh, I don't know, I have to put this together in a really good way. And so you're not even thinking about, at that point, it's really hard to think about the audience. So when you already have the pre-audience in front of you, you're always thinking about the audience. I love that. Mark. It's kind of reversing the process. It's really good. I love that a lot.
That a couple of things come to mind. First of all, the idea of a social experience, public speaking as a social experience. Public speaking is, by definition, a social experience, but it is a very skewed public experience, because even though it's social, one person in front of others, it's not real-time engagement. It's rather skewed. So in a sense, this addresses that disconnect and brings back some of the social functions to it. And that's a dimension that I hadn't really thought about before. So that's a takeaway from this conversation. One point that I think is important that I mean, as public speakers and coaches, you know this well, but aside from not having an audience to develop one's message, some people are so focused on what they want to talk about that they don't give a damn about the audience.
Yeah.
You know, they're gonna be like, this analysis I've done is so important. This analysis is groundbreaking and changing. I'm going to tell you all about my analysis. And the audience is like, let me check my phone. No, they don't yawn. They have their phones.
Yeah.
So connecting to an audience is not only important for them to develop their message, but I mean, the quality of their message, but also to figure out like, what should they be, not just like kind of how to make their message better, but like what the hell should they talk about in the first place? Like how to get from who their audience is to where they want to go, because that's the path that speech writers and speech coaches can help people navigate. But until people are in a room with people who are disinterested in their analysis, they won't have the challenge of navigating their message along that path.
Yeah. You know,
Go ahead, Cathey.
sorry,
No, go
Mark.
ahead.
I just think we're all engrossed in this. Like, we get it. We're like, I think that all three of us are like doubled down on like, this is such a good idea. I think maybe we could veer the conversation a little bit, because my brain now is going, awesome, this is a great idea. Let's bring it to the world. All right, come on, Dan, let's go. Let's like go out there and do it. I want to see more of this. When's your next fight club? I want to be there. And whatever you end up calling it, I want to show up. I want to be there. So I'll start this part of the conversation. I think that for a company might be a little bit different than for a general audience. And so for a company, one of the things you might consider, because Mark and I work with some of our own clients that, I have some clients that have been my clients for years and years and years, and I do a lot of work with them. So I feel like I'm part of their team. I completely understand how their organization runs. I understand what their challenges are. I understand what their strengths are. If you go into a company, it's almost like what you're doing in this lab that you create is you are able to pull the most brilliant things out of everybody's head. So I think that process changes a little bit more. I would say, because people at a company, I don't think they can be their own audience like that. You know what I mean? It becomes a little bit different than when you're like at like whatever Mark went to, where it's like a bunch of people that don't have all the same experience, that don't have that commonality. I just think that you probably need to, pitch it a little bit differently. But at a company, I feel like you could pitch it as like, you're going to pull the best and brightest things in this lab together so that you can have a cohesive one thing that you can bring to the audience.
Yeah. I was going to add this too, because I actually worked with a group of people all from one organization. And what they struggled with was they had this one concept. And what they found is that multiple divisions in this company were all using the same term, and yet they were all presenting it a completely different way. And the reason why they brought these 4 or 5 people together was to say, okay, where's we need to create one
common story.
Common story. And I think that's an example also of what Cathey is saying. There's value in it, but it has to be pitched a little bit differently, right? Because they're not looking to speak in front of a group, but they are looking for commonality that comes from these 4, 5, 6 brains that come together.
I So for one, I hear you and I appreciate your perspective, Kathy, and I need to puzzle it through. The way that my thinking on the groups evolved is that Fight Club number one would be, what did we use, Mark, when you were there? It was I had a few prompts. What advice can you give? What advice do you wish you received? And there's one other advice-ish prompt. But for those questions, I try to get at what do you know, as something that people can speak about. So
Mm-hmm.
even in a corporate setting, I would imagine going into a group with we're looking at people developing people's skills to speak in front of an audience. So I don't need them to say, what do you think of ABC marketing plan? That will come in session number 2 or session number 3. But session number 1, get people talking about something that they know. It doesn't matter if they're from the same company or different companies, same walk of life or whatever. People are engaging in the topic. And as we proceed with additional sessions, then we can start talking something about what you know about our product line, our service, or whatever, to make it more relevant to work. But after you've progressed to just engaging with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, Dan. I mean, you're right. Here's the thing. So in my mind, because I always kind of like, I'm always thinking about like, there's 2 types of people that I'm coaching. I mean, either coaching like an individual that's giving a TED Talk type of thing, or I'm in a company trying to teach people like some of the same things that I teach the individual, but in a level that will work in a corporation. And corporations always care about the business bottom line, right? And so there's always like, what's the business case for it? I see a lot of creative uses. When you started talking product, I was like, oh, of course, marketing, product. Like there's a lot of really great uses where you could use it, and it would kind of look very similar to how you could run it with a bunch of people. Because at the end of the day, too, you have a bunch of individuals at a company that have different experiences. And so if you ask people about what's the best advice that they've ever gotten, I could see that could be an awesome conversation. Could be totally different things and stuff. So yeah, of course, I see that being really a great space. I just, for you, I'm like, ooh, what's the best way to like sell this, if you will, pitch it to a company, and then to pitch it to open spaces or something. And companies will always want to have something to ground it to, right? They're going to want to be like, I mean, even for like storytelling, you think about, like, I go in and I teach companies storytelling. There's some companies that completely understand the value of storytelling. They're like, oh, we got to be better at it. We got to, like Mark, this organization you're talking about, we have to understand the story. We have to be able to tell the same story. We have to understand that. And then there's other companies that are just kind of like, we got a really good product. There it is. It's very well engineered, Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're in a space where all 3 of us, like 1,000,000% understand the value of brainstorming, collective creativity, doing what we're actually doing right now, which is just talking something through and thinking about it. But I don't know, I'm pretty excited for you. And so my brain's already going to like, how are you going to position it? My marketing brain is like, how are you going to position it? How will you sell it to different people?
Well, there's one more facet, which I don't think we'll have time to explore, but just let me put it out there for your consideration. We've discussed the value of being able to develop a speech. What about the other guys in the meeting? All the evaluators, all the people who are, it's like, if you were in a Toastmasters meeting, this is evaluation on steroids. You get to hear a speech, give feedback, help people develop as speakers, understand the constraints, be sensitive and constructive for new speeches all at once. Like the aside from the value to the person who's going to conduct the speech, well, I don't know, maybe Mark, you can speak to your experience as a participant in the group with the evaluations. Was it just another Toastmasters meeting, or did you sense that there was like fire?
The evaluations were helpful, and it was nice to be a part of that process. And it was nice to hear different people share things. What was arguably even more valuable for me, and I think even valuable for people that I've, shared this idea with, was the thought time. Being given a prompt or a question or an idea to think about, and actually having, whether it be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, for us it was 5 minutes, that 5 minutes of focus time. Nothing going on, nobody else in the room talking, just you and your thoughts, and the expectation that by the end of 5 minutes, not word for word, Cathey, we love that, right? Not word for word, but a blueprint, an outline, a plan for what you want to say. I even think about all of the people who have to go up in front of a group and speak and say something on the spur of the moment, and they're like, I don't know what I'm going to say. Don't throw me up in front of the crowd. Sit down for 5 minutes and think about these basics. And when the 5 minutes are done, you've got something to talk about. Like, even in that instance, in teaching, we call it wait time. That's our favorite term for it. But that 5 minutes of targeted silent focus, that was one of the most magical things that I took away from my experience at Fight Club.
Okay, that's valuable feedback. And that meeting produced 4 thankworthy speeches.
And think about, in a world of hustle and bustle, and let's talk corporate and companies right now, who's really giving themselves the time to think? Who's really giving themselves the time for, and Cathey, I love this term, collective creativity? We all know it's valuable, but how often is it actually practiced? So, I think there's a lot of value in the time, the collective wisdom of this, and there's so many possibilities.
I love it. Well, we had a really deep conversation about what Fight Club is, what it should be named, how it could maybe benefit people, regardless of whether they're in a corporation, individual, or whatever. I'm curious, Dan, for you, what you think about this a lot. You've been running it. It's a great idea. What was beneficial for you to be talking about today?
Well, there are a couple things. I have an echo all of a sudden. So, okay. That was strange. There are a couple things that struck me. I like the word lab. I think it's a fun word. It occurred to me that there are 2 flavors of Fight Club that I might want to integrate. That one workshop, a series of sessions doesn't have to be all the extemporaneous speech workshops. I could blend the other one in and use one to help people construct even stronger speeches. I'm really interested in the idea that public speaking, even though it's social by nature, is very skewed. And just kind of the dynamics of that are kind of interesting, because it seems that my strategy is to challenge that. So I might want to spend some time understanding that skewed nature, how what I'm doing plays into that and supports that whole process. Other than that, yeah, I have some notes. There's plenty of food for thought.
I love it. Yeah. Dan, so people are interested now. We've now even put it out to the world in a much different platform. Where's the best way for people to find out about Fight Club or Storm Lab or Two Minds or whatever you end up ultimately calling it? Where can they find out about you and what you're doing?
Well, I don't have a website or social media presence right now. I have email if people want to reach out and discuss it.
Yeah.
The email address is fightclub@newyorksmarts.com. That's fightclub@nysmarts.com. And New York Smarts used to be a English as a second language business that I ran. The business is not operational right now, but I have the domain. So I'm fightclub@newyorksmarts.com. And thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. By the way, that's a really great name for a URL. It's very good. New York Smarts. I love it. Well, if you are watching and you are interested in what Dan's doing, please email him. And Dan, I would love to be invited to your next Fight Club. I would love to experience this. And, thanks for being on our show. Thank you for sharing your story. If anybody's watching and you're like, wow, I just want to be like Dan, I want to kind of talk about this thing that I really love that I'm doing. How do you do that? You can get on this show with Marc and I. We have a website. It's abouttogodownshow.com. You can reach us there. Or if you know a friend, or do you have that friend that you're like, you should give a TED Talk. You should be talking about this idea. Hit us up. We always love having these idea conversations. So Dan, thank you for being on our show. It definitely went down today. We love to break down these ideas. And for everybody watching, thank you for being part of our community and watching our shows. And until next time, it's about to go down, y'all. Let's go.
Okay. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do that, but thank you so much.
Yeah, Dan, thank you.